So I feel that we're going to make some big changes. I guess normally disruption happens outside of the industry. It's usually not people within that disrupt. So maybe this is also what's coming next. But I think that as architects, we should be starting to look at what we can do instead of just being disrupted, but we should try to disrupt ourselves, disrupt our way of doing things, and get with the times.
Hi guys, welcome back for another episode of the IBD Hub podcast. I'm very excited today. Finally, things are slowly going back to normal. So yeah, for us it's been really a relief. We are now recording from Rotterdam, and everything is open and business is starting to pick up again. I just hope that people stay safe as much as possible, so we don't have to be locked up once again. But overall, yeah, I'm very happy to finally also start this podcast maybe face to face next week, which would be quite an upgrade. So a little bit of an update about the IBD company and the IBD Hub. We have opened again our consultation for business development and for international business development. So if any of you listening are looking for consultancy for that, we are your people. And we're really here to help you strategize your business development and marketing strategies. So you can contact me directly on LinkedIn, or you can drop us an email at info@theibdcompany.com. And it will be a pleasure for us to come to your office or do a Zoom call and try to figure out with you what is the best way to acquire new projects and new clients. So really looking forward to this. Now moving on to today's episode. So today we're going to talk about lean startup and how that could be implemented in architecture. And my guest today is Nyasha Harper-Michon. She's a creative and strategic thinker who thrives at the intersection of design, business, and technology. She currently works as an architect and business developer at RAU, an Amsterdam-based architecture firm specialized in circularity. She also writes a column for A-Zine online magazine, addressing architectural themes through a personal lens. She's passionate about supporting health and well-being of people, places, and the planet in general. And she's involved in various projects from the future of design and technology to fostering diversity and inclusion within the architecture field. So just before starting the episode, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what lean startup methodology actually means in this context. I don't know if many of you have read the book, but I will put it as a link in the bio, and I will also add a reading list in the next upcoming days that will be published in the IBD Hub group, both on LinkedIn and Facebook. But essentially, the lean startup methodology by Eric Rice is about creating options, whether it's design or product options, that are based on actual scientific facts. So you would make a design option that is based on data that comes from the users or data that comes from the environment, and that would be then translated into a certain shape or a certain type of environment. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the episode in a minute. For the rest, we would be extremely interested to know from you what kind of subject you would like to talk about in the next few episodes. So write me an email with some suggestions. I'll be more than happy to implement them for the next few weeks. So now on to the episode. So hi, Nyasha. Thank you for coming to this episode.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Julia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we get to talk today about lean startups and architecture and how we can combine that in the future. I think it's a very interesting topic. We met a few months ago, and this is how we got to know each other. So it's really nice to have the opportunity to talk about it together again in a more extensive way.
Definitely.
Yeah, indeed. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience and background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm someone who's really interested, really passionate in anything to do with design, business, and technology. And I think that really leads into our conversation, which is about the intersection of all of these. Right now, I'm working as an architect and business developer at RAU, and it's an Amsterdam-based firm, and we do circular solutions or circular construction. So also I started my studies in Paris, and then after I finished them here, I did my master's at the Academie van Bouwkunst in Amsterdam. And I graduated with a project called Archtivism, which was about thinking global and acting local and thinking of a new way of using place-responsive design to make more resilient urban constructions and urban environments. And during school, especially, I think one of the things that I saw a lot or I was exposed to, and also in practice after school and during, was the fact that architecture is quite a traditional industry, let's say, or the construction industry compared to other professions. And my wife is a marketer, so I've always been exposed to another world, and she's working in a tech company. So I kind of was confronted with this very different way of doing things as opposed to the very traditional architecture sense. And this has kind of shaped some of the ways I think about things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that we can learn a lot as architects from other professions, and namely the tech industry and what they're doing today.
Yeah. No, it's really funny because we met a few months ago, actually after the presentation of Peter Andreas about creating value through architecture, which is actually the previous episode as well of the IBD Hub. And that's also how we got in, like, to talk about how we can push the field forward in a way. And,
exactly.
Because what we can see is that the role of the architect has changed over time considerably. So before, we were more in direct contact with the client and also had more of a political role. So there has been a change of the profession, and now we're in this bubble and kind of staying still. And that's really what I would like to talk about with you today, because we started the conversation last time, but we didn't have time to speculate some more. So I'm really interested to see your point of view about the current situation and how that may evolve through time.
I think just in general, the world is at a point where, with the fourth industrial revolution, as some call it, especially like all this new technology that we have and the availability of it all is really shaping all the industries. It's really changing the way that we create, the way that we share, the way that we work. It's incredible. And there's so much that we can learn from it and that we can use to instruct our profession. Well, a point of inspiration, let's say for me, was when I picked up Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And I was just fascinated by this way of thinking. So for me, like, I kind of just sum it up with the Lean Startup is more or less favoring experimentation over elaborate planning.
Sure.
Customer, client, user feedback rather than just your intuition to guide decisions. And then iterative design and learning over the traditional kind of do everything, the big design upfront sort of method. And when you hear that, when I was reading this, I was thinking, well, this is really the opposite in a way of what we do as architects, where we really do elaborate planning. I mean, this is what our profession is all about. Experimentation is, yes, we do in a certain way in design, but not to the extent that the Lean Startup puts forward. We don't.
It's very subjective.
Exactly. And we don't do this iterative design of sort of improving and using data, especially client and user feedback to instruct that. So I think that we kind of have to make this huge shift in architecture and in design to really use data, to use behavioral design, to use the things that are going on and use these tools to then make informed decisions, and to come back on your discussion that you were having with Peter Andreas. Yes, to not just make assumptions about things, but make informed decisions. And I think it's not only something that happens after the fact, so at the end of the project, kind of like, oh, let's learn from what we've built. So it's not only about post-occupancy studies and analysis, but also about during the design. How can you learn and how can you get to a specific goal during the process? I think that that's where we kind of need to be headed now in the architectural field.
Yeah, I mean, for me, well, from my experience in architecture practices, what I can see happening, and also with some of our clients, is the fact that we are still building like 5-10 years ago for some users that are evolving very quickly. So that created some kind of a gap between the two, between the users and us, actually, in the way that we design. So it's really difficult to actually design for 10-50 years ahead, like in the future. Architects should be trying to anticipate what's going to happen in terms of living space, office space, etc. But I just feel we're not doing that exercise yet. And also what is really shocking is that we still take 5 to 10 years to act, like from the first sketch that the architect made to the building itself. And I mean, even the NASA creates a spaceship in less time than that. So I'm actually, for me, this is also part of the issue. So how can we shrink the design process through what you said, probably like trying to make design options that are based on data rather than subjective matters, and that maybe will shrink the timings because it will be based on data itself and not just subjective people that will decide on it.
Yeah, and I think that the main thing is just that during the process, if we kind of start with one design and you have an idea and you just sort of continue with that, and then of course things do take quite a lot of time in architecture. If it's not really based on anything other than intuition, I think it's also a bit of a shame, because you're not able to change it in a way maybe that's going with new technologies during the process, etc. Because there's no ultimate goal in a way. I think that when you start the process thinking, how can I achieve such and such goal, and that helps you to be able to optimize, of course, because you're actually aiming for something, then you can really work something out throughout the process, getting better and better or closer and closer to that goal. And I think that that's something that also within the architecture world, there's a lot of yeah, this sort of objective part is less used in architecture. Let's say a lot of it is very subjective, and we like to say, the architecture is kind of an art and a science. And I think that people are more, or architects in general, are more inclined to lean towards the art side, in the sense of saying that it's a human thing. We cannot just make it with data, no. But I think it's kind of the bridge between the two. And I think it's not about it being like a dry sort of thing or just scientific and not have feeling, but it's about learning from what's going on and using that. And the interpretation of data is a very human thing. It's not, data is just a data set. It doesn't say what to do with it. It's very just neutral. And then what you do with that information, how you are going to use data, for example, to instruct wayfinding in a building, to make things more intuitive for the user. And it's not something that you can necessarily just see in the plan, but sometimes it's also by having people sort of test things out that you realize, oh, people tend to gravitate towards this area. Maybe this is where the kiosk, the check-in, or the entrance reception desk or something should be. And it can be from simple things, of course, to like more energy performance sort of data that we would use in a building. But I think that really using the data to instruct the process can lead to really interesting things. So I like the example of Zoku. They're a long stay hotel, and they started off with the design of their space doing surveys. So kind of like a market research to find out what their clientele would be interested in having. And then afterwards, they made 6 prototypes, and they made one-to-one mock-ups and had people test them out with sensors on to understand what was anxiety inducing, what was awkward, what was weird. And they used that to be able to say, okay, we moved this slightly, we changed this at this position, or how you open such and such drawer. People are lost, they don't know how to open it. And I thought it was really interesting because in the end, they make something that their clients are comfortable with. I mean, this is perfect in a way. And in an article I had read, the managing director, he said, when we opened, we already knew people would love it. Yeah. And it's like, if you can do this as an architect, if you can create something where with data, you're able to find out that the end users will appreciate this building, or will be extremely comfortable in it, will have better well-being because of it, you've hit the jackpot. This is great for your client in B2B, at least, architecture practice.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that I think like when you have meetings with stakeholders, many of them maybe don't have a lot of experience with architecture and how it feels to be in a space. So often what they do is that they tell you their opinion, but it's not necessarily, maybe they didn't understand the plan, or they can't visualize it. It happens quite often.
Absolutely.
And the more the projects are complex, the more you get those discussions. Whether it is, for instance, I was working on a hospital project, and all the scientific groups had different expectations from the space. But then if you're able to get this data, whether it's with VR or something, to really make them feel the space, they're able to, make a quick decision quicker than discussing it with the group, and it's probably more accurate than if it was just based on plans and sections. So that may actually shrink the timing, because I think a lot of architects are worried that, okay, doing this analysis, taking the time to analyze what the users might feel, etc., might be a big investment of money and time, but actually it might shrink the timing even more because there's less discussions about it.
To add to that, I think that one of the biggest problems in architecture is the fact that we are often seen as a commodity. So, the fees that we get are very low compared to, let's say, business consultants, other consultants that can be a part even of the project. But I think that, architects are not paid very well, let's say. And I think that it's also, just like you're saying, the fact that when we have discussions about preferences, it's very hard to argue why something should be this shade and that shade. It's kind of a matter of opinion in the end. And I think that, of course, there is something to do with feeling, and we do have a certain knowledge that we've acquired over the years of our practice and study within our field. But I think that having something where you can discuss it from a business sense, so the sense of what the project is able to do. So if we come back to the example of a hotel, it's not about it being lovely or just beautiful. I mean, maybe that's a good thing. I think it's nice if it is. But the real thing that the client wants is to make the occupancy rate high. They want to have the rooms filled as much as possible. And in order to do that, it has to appeal to their target group. And if we know what their target group actually wants or what the issues, their pain points, what they're dealing with, and we can sort of gather that data and use this group that we're targeting for the project to be able to design for them, and we can have that conversation with our client, I think that they'll be more inclined to value our positioning and to value what we're saying, because we're helping them towards their own business model. And I think that speaking that language, and so therefore using the data to be able to get to a point and say, yeah, well, with this, we're able to make the room so much better and help you with this occupancy rate, or that we've had such and such client where we help their occupancy rates, increase by 10% or whatever it is. But to be able to also track these things, I think is important. And then you become an essential part of the project, and not just someone who's coming and putting some nice things in places. And I think that the fact that we're seen as a commodity is a big problem in our profession, because we're not valued in a way that we should be. But we have to kind of step up and show our value.
Yeah, I think that if you use data, also your learning curve is much quicker. So you manage to take the experience that you had in your previous building and know that you can't make the same mistakes. So that also help business wise, since we're not paid a lot, to manage to be quicker, more efficient, and give a result that is always better and better the more experience we have. The more we are based on data, the more also we learn throughout our projects. So we're able to learn quicker and also improve our design every time a little better. So what was that means business-wise is also the fact that you will spend less time on your design every time because you're more efficient. And you will have less discussion with the client because you'll be able to prove, okay, last time we did like this and it works. So therefore, there is more hard numbers and proof that it worked previously. So I think that business-wise, even if we're not paid a lot, if we manage to be more efficient and give a better result, that will automatically change our status as architect as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's we find that architecture practices that invest into a research and development department have better results in the end with clients, because they're able to test things in the research and development and then work hand in hand with the clients while they're doing the project. So that can also help. You have MVRDV, for instance, who is trying to develop new ways to communicate directly with the client, whether it's with VR or with other tools. They hired people like video gamers that are really able to invest time to create this communication and feedback as well. You have UN Studio with UN Sense. And so all these things, I think, will make things evolve in a positive way, because architects are trying to research how to improve this data and ultimately how to sell their architecture better as well.
Yeah, as well. And to kind of piggyback off of that, now a lot of how we use technology, because we do use technology. I mean, we all use computer-aided design tools, for example. I mean, CAD is normal, or BIM is very much widespread here in the Netherlands, at least. So we do use a lot of these tools available to us to, at least to visualize things. And so rendering and this kind of thing, and VR, like you mentioned, is being used more and more to kind of show what things are like. It's that extra step of not only it being sort of like a visual thing, but like more of an experience.
Yeah.
So what I'm really looking like forward to is really for architects to use VR as this experience where you could get into the building, feel what it's like, and start to notice how things can change, and study how your client or how the end users are using the space or what they're doing in it in the VR model, to be able to say, okay, we need to make some shifts, like I was talking earlier about wayfinding or these kinds of details, let's say of the building, which can really shape the experience or how people are moving through it, and to try to get the data points on that, and then interpret that into the design and yeah, have it instructed. So I think that'll be really exciting when that starts to be the norm, as opposed to it being like, oh, here you can just see the building and wow, these wooden panels are amazing. But really start to it be more about the experience, and to study that experience, I think is yeah, it's going to be fascinating, and I can't wait for it to be the norm.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, you're right. But you know, we were talking about lean startup and how it can be applied during the process, but could we also apply it during the competition phases? Because that's also a part of the architect's work that is underpaid or not paid at all, and that has a lot of risks. So do you see any ways that we could apply that during those phases as well?
When you say in those phases, more in the design, so in the actual designs that are then being done for competitions, or in the
I mean
process
more like when you are 3 architects to compete for the same project, and you know, you usually take 1 month or 2 to create a proposal and then sell it to the client during a presentation, if you have the opportunity to present, of course. Otherwise you just submit it online. But you know, also there we waste a lot of time because we make booklets that are like 200 pages, and maybe we focus too much on what the design looks like more than actually trying to sell it as a product, or like identify the value proposal.
I definitely think all of this also has to do, like coming back to the fact that our profession is quite traditional, even on a business sense. I think using this data or using the new technologies, for now, it's going to set you apart. So this is also a great thing in a sense to invest in, because instead of, like you said, focusing on maybe just the visual aspect of a design, you'll be saying, okay, so we've chosen this, you know, and this is what we came up with because this is 10 times better for, you know, productivity, or it's good for well-being, or for client satisfaction, whatever the metrics are that this particular client would be interested in, is going to be a different approach than most offices take. And of course, it depends on the type of competition. Some competitions are very much about the, you know, wow, big bang thing. But even that, you could argue that maybe there are certain forms or certain types of things that appeal more to the average person, or to whatever type of tourist they're trying to attract, or business people. There's always a target group. There's always a particular thing that can be tested and that you can sort of work with, or different ways that you can nudge people to do things through design. If you're in tune with that and you're able to notice what's going on, because it's going on whether we know it or not in a way, but if you're able to tap into that, I think then you can make much larger strides and hopefully be more relevant in the end when you submit your competition proposal. Yeah. But especially now, it would completely set you apart, because if you have something that, of course, aesthetically is interesting, and on top of it, there's a business case as to why this works and why this is good for business for your client, I mean, what more can they ask for?
Yeah, indeed. And it's also about really highlighting the needs of the client, and even translating that not only into a design, but also take some keywords that the client has mentioned and really introduce them into the marketing of the project, right? So that the client recognize certain keywords and you speak the same language. Because often what happens is, as architects, we speak in a very different way than normal people do, actually. So what happens is that we can be misunderstood, or maybe the storytelling is not as impactful because we are not really speaking the same language. So one point for me is to always select the right keywords that the client will recognize, because that will create an emotional impact to your design.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the other thing that I see very often, because we work a lot with architects during the competition phase, is that, of course, you spend a lot of time in your design and you go very much into detail, but this is not the right phase to get into detail. So the important thing is to really highlight the why, the how, and the what.
Mm-hmm.
And I see some mistakes being made there in a way, because the why is often misunderstood. So the why is not like we use BIM and we do stakeholder management and stuff like that. This is the how we're going to achieve that, but it's not really like why you're the right specialist to do this, and what is your passion throughout your project, and what are you trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And then the how will come with the BIM and the Revit and your references and experience. And then the what is more like your expertise. So what kind of awards did you manage to get? What kind of feedback did you get from the clients, previous clients, and so on? So I think that this is also a part of the lean startup that could be very much introduced as a structure to the marketing of a competition. And it kind of sets you on a different path than everybody else.
We're definitely lagging behind in that regard as well. Yeah, and just like you said, speaking the same language as those that we serve. And in one of the articles that I wrote for A-Zine, I addressed this topic and I said, we need to have a paradigm shift. We need to put the client at the center of how we communicate things, because they're our client. And I think that sometimes there's a lot of, we say it like if the client is another architect, which they are not most of the time, that we don't speak the same language as them. And so we miss out on a lot of opportunities to communicate things in a good way. And it's not something that we learn in school, unfortunately, because it's we're just amongst more architects who, I guess in school, we kind of have a client in a way, which is your teacher, who's an architect. And so they understand your architect speak, but then when you enter the real world, it's not the same.
No, indeed. But that's also what I wanted to know your opinion on, because you're like me, architect, and then move on to business development and kind of being the link between the two, right? How do you feel about the architecture education not including any business or marketing modules or notions, actually?
I think it's a real shame. It's doing our industry a huge disservice, because I think that the young people that we are bringing into our practice are not trained for the real world of architecture. There's a lot of skills that we aren't taught in school, which is it's a real shame. And I think that the main thing is, going back to what we were saying earlier, is that it's really this sense of looking inwards. The fact that the profession is so insular, we never really look outside to other professions, just what else is going on for inspiration. And if we did, we would see how other people are pitching other things. And I think there's so much to learn from that. It's not because it's a building that it's any different than someone pitching for investment for a project, pitching a new product to a team. It's the same skills are required. We need to learn from outside. And I think that by not doing that now in the schools, we're bringing out people that then have to kind of figure it out on their own, or have to rely on the practice, the people in the office to then teach it. It's a bit of a shame. It creates this disconnect between what young people then expect the profession to be. They arrive there, and then I think there's quite a bit of disappointment, disconnect also with the reality of things. And it can mean that we can lose talented people in the profession who just move on to something else because they're just, there's too much of a shift.
And it's also the fact that we have a disadvantage compared to construction companies and developers who are trained in negotiation and are trained in how to set up a business, etc., etc. So we come into the market with a disadvantage, and then you kind of have to learn on the spot. So that's also something that is problematic. And coming back to what you were saying, to look inwards, the other thing is also the fact that the way that we build teams should also evolve in order to have more input. So what happens now is that we build things the way that we used to, and we don't really try to get people involved into it. It's just regular team with a set of engineers and acousticians and stuff, and then you start the project. But the smart way to do it, and in order to have an innovative project, would be to also integrate some specialists that you wouldn't normally add onto the team, whether it's someone that has a PhD in a certain type of urbanism and has been acquainted to certain issues in the local area, whether it's a startup that is about technologies and how to automatically integrate data points onto your design. I think the construction of the team also is important, and that's where we can learn from others and have an outlook on what is going on in other industries. Because what we have now is we build it and then other people fit things into it afterwards, and it's not really the order that it should be in, actually.
Yeah. It's not optimized at all. What we're getting at as we're talking here is that, in a way, we started talking about lean startup when it comes to design, but I think that there are things you could draw parallels from the lean startup, in the sense that it's really about having a culture of experimentation that goes beyond the actual design that you produce, but also in the way that you handle the process, the whole construction process, the whole design from the beginning to after post-occupancy, when you're still analyzing your buildings. And also the way that the work life for an architect is. In all those aspects, we're still very traditional, and not only in the way that we design, but in all those other aspects I just mentioned. And that if we were to favor experimentation, and experimentation with a goal, it's not just experimentation where you just say, let's try this, let's try that, but you're aiming for something and you're seeing how you can get there. If we were doing this on the regular, if it was part of our culture, of just trying things out, we'd be able to get much further in lots of ways. And it would make our jobs easier for us. It would make the projects better. I think there's a lot to say for this kind of mindset, as opposed to trying to do everything, making it the best and then delivering at the end. And I know that when we make the parallels with the digital world, it's very easy because if you think of software, they are able to test things in a way that in real life it's difficult, because with software you can just A/B test things. We're not attuned to experimentation. I mean, even this whole COVID lockdown situation, people having to go work from home for architects, I mean, this was catastrophe, which is, it's incredible, because lots of companies now are saying, do we even need an office space? But architects are not thinking that way yet. We're behind in lots of things, maybe 10 years behind everybody else. But if we get up to date, I think that there's a lot that we can learn by putting ourselves out of our comfort zone. It would be better for design in general. It would be better for our lives. It would be good for business.
Yeah, no, indeed. And it's also, I mean, there is so much potential, especially when it comes to data. You could always translate it into a tool to use. So if you we're going back to the last episode with the value creation and really understand how your building performs on a human side, social side, and economical side, you would be able to build maybe a software which could predict what your next client will want, or maybe what the users of a different building may feel in a design at a very early stage. I mean, there is different ways to then translate this data and make it a tool, like a proper tool, not just a book or an analysis in Word, but really move on from there and maybe get data scientists involved or program developers involved to try to really translate that. And what you can see is that developers, real estate developers, are investing money to do that. So now they're like coming up with some softwares where people can decide on what kind of apartment they want and just like shop from there. There is other softwares that maximize the height and the meter squares that you can have in every plot according to the regulations and so on. So it is possible to translate all of this into tools that make you shrink your working time and improve your design.
It's really about improving the design, because if you're able to do things that may take very long otherwise, or that you have to keep doing, because I think we have a lot of things that we redo for every project. So every time a new project comes, you're sort of reinventing the wheel over and over and over and over again. And with these tools, you can move up, get faster to a phase where you can start working in finer details. And in those details, you can really start getting closer and closer to looking at what makes better well-being. What is it about this experience that people have that we can design, that we can shape? How can we get them to feel a certain way and understand that? And you have to also have time to be able to unpack that data and unpack what that means. So if you can have some of the more, let's say, repetitive tasks also be sort of shrunk, and also give the space for us humans to use our brains to interpret this data, then we can really do a lot there. So I think that there's also a fear in the profession that these things are taking over our job, that architects will no longer be needed because there's parametric software that can do things, and then what's going to happen to us? But I think the better way to see things is, of course, to adopt these things, not to shun technology. Technology is neutral. It's not trying to take anyone's place. It's more something that we can use as a tool. It's our responsibility to use all the technologies that are out there as tools in order to make a better built environment. And with them, we can really do so much more. That's really what we have to do. We have to use them as a tool to do more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like any industry or like any business, if we stop innovating, we're not going to last, basically. This is the case for any industries or any company, no matter the scale or the success. So
exactly,
it's really important not to feel fearful about innovating, but be more open-minded about it and try to even discuss it with younger generation of architects and really maybe start thinking about how together you can move on. Because what happens now is that there is a lot of architecture startups that are starting to develop those softwares or this way of thinking, and like Architect that we saw previously in the episode, and Superworld as well, and those are young companies that are really trying. But of course, if there was a partnership between traditional architects and startup architects, things would move on
much faster. So that's also why building teams for the right project is also important, because you can partner up a co-architect with an architect and kind of have this dialogue happening. So
yeah, the younger generations, or the millennials, as you know, as we call them, or I guess I'm a millennial myself, so we're searching for purpose. For me, I kind of see myself in between the creative aspect of architecture and the strategic side of things. Just in general, I'm creative, but also very much strategic and rational. I always try to question, what are we doing in the grand scheme of things, or in the larger way of thinking or looking at things, and what are we contributing to? And I always feel like I didn't study so long just to make buildings. The real reason why we're here is to make a better, more resilient, more sustainable built environment for the benefit of society. And that's our responsibility. And that's the business that we're in. Data, lean startup thinking, it can help us to make really big strides towards a better built environment. And so these are just tools that can really help to thrust our industry much further and help the production to be much more relevant, much more accurate, doing a service to society in general. And we have to get this experimentation, this collaborative way of thinking, and this external way of looking at others, looking at other professions for inspiration as part of the architectural culture. And I think the young people are doing this. We're seeing that something has to change. There's a lot going on now. And like you said, there's lots of startups coming up. There's lots of young people graduating every year with new ideas. So I feel that we're going to make some big changes. I guess normally disruption happens outside of the industry. It's usually not people within that disrupt. So maybe this is also what's coming next. But I think that as architects, we should be starting to look at what we can do instead of just being disrupted, but we should try to disrupt ourselves, disrupt our way of doing things, and get with the times. That's what I think we really need to do. And I'm for me, this is what I'm doing with my career. And I think there's many more young people who are in this mindset, who think, no more with the traditional way. Let's get into the 21st century for real and make real change.
Yeah. Well, wow. Thank you so much. I think you summed it up like really nice. So I'm not going to add anything else to this conclusion. So thank you so much for coming onto this episode and discussing this with me. It was really nice having your input.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure discussing this, and it's great to have a discussion with you and that we can share it with listeners so that the conversation goes further. So that's been great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.